Good morning, distinguished guests, and importantly, the 1,400 students from our city's schools. Welcome on behalf of Newcastle's public, Catholic and independent schools communities to the annual Newcastle Combined Schools Anzac service. This is the 59th year that Newcastle's 3 school communities have come together to commemorate Anzac Day. We wish to acknowledge the following special guests. Councillors Lisa Tierney and Stephanie Posniak, representing Lord Mayor Councillor Jeff McCloy, who unfortunately has fallen ill. Mr Doug Wallace, President of the Newcastle District Council of RSL sub-branches. Mr Nick Rippon, representing Sharon Reason, MP, Federal Member for Newcastle. Mr Todd Dagwell, representing Mr Tim Owen, MP, State Member for Newcastle. Mr Terry Millett, Chief Executive Officer, Newcastle Permanent Building Society. Mr Michael Leach, Head of Marketing, Newcastle Permanent Building Society. Mr Barry Lewis, AM, and Mr Phil Neat, Directors of the Newcastle Permanent Building Society. Mr Boyd Buffett, representing Jennifer Collins, New South Wales Deputy Commissioner, Department of Veterans Affairs. Mr Stephen Harris, representing Mr Frank Potter, Regional Director, Relieving, Hunter Central Coast Region, Department of Education and Communities. Mr Ray Collins, Director of Schools, Catholic Schools Office, Diocese of Maitland, Newcastle. Mr Duncan McKenzie, Dean of Students, Newcastle Grammar School, representing Newcastle's independent schools. Dr Peter Hendry, AO, ex-prisoner of war, and Mrs Senta Hendry, members of the City of Newcastle ex-service community. 2013 is the 15th year that this ceremony has been organised by a subcommittee of senior high school students, rather than just adults. However, we could not have done it all on our own. We wish to recognise Newcastle District Council of RSL sub-branches, the City of Newcastle, Department of Veterans Affairs in Canberra and Newcastle, and our teachers for their support and encouragement. We especially acknowledge the Newcastle Permanent Building Society, who has provided the essential financial support as sponsors for the past 8 years to enable this unique event continue its proud tradition.
Anzac Day traditionally commemorates the sacrifice of members of the Australian and New Zealand Armed Forces who have served and those who died in all wars and peacekeeping operations. It is held on the anniversary of the landing by the Australian and New Zealand Army Corps at Gallipoli in Turkey almost 97 years ago on the 25th of April 1915. Members of the Australian Armed Forces have served in war zones throughout the world and in Australia, mainly in training and defensive roles. More than 100,000 Australians have died for their country as members of our armed forces, and many more were wounded. Some were held as prisoners of war. The 100th anniversary of the Gallipoli landings will be commemorated in 2 years' time. On the 3rd of September 1939, Great Britain declared war on Germany. World War II began. Prime Minister John Curtin announced the declaration on the 8th of December 1941.
Men and women of Australia, we are at war with Japan. That has happened because in the first instance, Japanese naval and air forces launched an unprovoked attack on British and United States territory.
For an area famous for its strong defences, the Allied troops were horrified to find the lack of defensive systems for protecting the fortress of Singapore from attack on the side of the island facing the land. It would only be a matter of time before Singapore was defeated, with hundreds of others sick or wounded. Last-minute reinforcements were sent by the Allied forces to help the Australian and British troops, but most were untrained and ill-equipped. The capture of Singapore's water effectively cut off the Allied troops and residents of Singapore from water of any kind. The bombing, fighting and heavy shelling continued for several days until the 15th of February. Lieutenant General Arthur Percival, the British commander in Singapore, decided to surrender. 50,000 Allied soldiers were taken as prisoners of war by the Japanese. About 13,000 of the POWs were Australians. Prisoners of war were servicemen, women and civilians who were captured and held prisoner during wartime.
Singapore, island, the southern end of the Malay Peninsula.
A vital part of the British Empire. The Gibraltar in the Far East. A strategic vital military base that protected Britain's other colonies in the Far East.
It was believed that the Japanese were inferior and would never take Singapore.
I do hope we're not getting too strong here in Australia. Otherwise the Japanese may never attempt to land here. Indian unit defending the beach was destroyed by an unexpected attack. There was no way for a Japanese plane. Orders were given that Singapore was to be held to the last man and that all officers must die at their post.
Think of yourself as an avenger, coming face to face with your father's murderer. Let his death enlighten your heart.
It's okay. Try to remain calm. I'm Dr. Peter Hendry. All my mates joined up, so I thought, why not? 18 months of training, now here I am in Singapore, at St Andrew's Cathedral, helping the wounded and the shell-shocked.
Unbelievable! On the 15th of February, 1942, an eerie silence descended over Singapore.
The fighting had stopped.
The British commander of Singapore had surrendered.
After the Allies surrendered in Singapore, the Australian soldiers waited out the long night, and in the morning, the Japanese told the troops that they would be marching to Changi Prison. Changi was about 14 kilometres away, which is about the same as walking around a football oval 35 times. They were forced to walk this distance in 4.5 hours. Luckily, the prisoners had comrades who they could rely on for support. They carried the packs of the injured prisoners, and in some cases carried the prisoners themselves. They also had the medical officers of the battalions marched up and down the columns of exhausted men, helping whoever was sick or injured.
Changi was the largest prisoner of war camp known to Australians. It would become their home and haven. The British and Australian prisoners are famed for their ability to overcome problems, get along with everyone in the camp, and their sense of optimism and humour. The prisoners struggled through malnutrition and disease, but still managed to find ways of tricking and teasing the Japanese.
We still can write today. We had it yesterday. We had it every day.
In one case, the POWs were forced to sign a statement promising that they would not attempt to escape. Reluctantly they signed, but confused the Japanese when many pretended to be called Ned Kelly. The prisoners created beauty in a world where it hardly existed, surrounded by jungle, infected by disease and suffocated by heat. The prisoners would find butterflies. They would pin them to the roof of their hut, hundreds of brightly coloured wings patterning the dull bamboo. They described it as more beautiful than the stained glass windows of a church. Initially, sporting events and concerts happened all the time.
You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. You make me happy when skies are grey.
By the second night at Changi, the POWs had organised a group of people to perform for the camp.
What a boy! Oh, you made me! You're so funny, dressed up as a Sheila.
The prisoners believed that they would be home by Christmas, by their birthdays. They wrote this on cards to their family and they said it to the other POWs. But their journey was not over. Death stole into the camp in the form of disease. The POWs, already sapped of their energy, had no idea that the worst was yet to come.
One of the last remaining prisoners of war lives in Newcastle today.
Dr. Peter Hendry,
A now 97-year-old man worked as
a doctor in the Australian Army.
Peter was born June 1915 and later graduated from Sydney University with a degree in medicine. He joined the Australian Army as a medical officer at the age of 25. He was part of
the 2nd and 10th Field Ambulance Brigade.
He was one of the many Australians captured by the Japanese during the fall of Singapore. However surprising it may seem, Dr. Peter Hendry described Changi as the University of Life. In order to avoid boredom, the prisoners of war arranged concert bands, singing groups, circus acts, sporting teams and educational classes. As a medic at Changi, Hendry observed the friendships that developed in Changi Prison as Australians played sport together, made tools, grew foods, learnt languages and played music with each other. As Australians were sent to work on the Thai-Burma Railway. When prisoners arrived at Thailand, they were sent to walk 300 kilometres to their camps. This is the same as walking from Newcastle to Sydney and back. It was Dr. Peter Hendry's responsibility to provide medical attention, advice and treatment to his fellow men. Dr. Peter Hendry saw the worst of men and the best of men. It was at these times when men were on the brink of death, in unimaginable pain, when Dr. Peter Hendry realised the vital importance of mateship. He said, friends were there till the end. Mates were there till the end. Without a mate, you died.
I've travelled down some lonely roads, rode crooked tracks with straight. I've learned life's noblest creed, summed up in one word.
Mate!
Someone will take you for what you are, regardless of your state, and stand as firm as theirs will, because he is your
Mate!
And know all so long ago, the truth I have to state. And a man does not know what loneliness means until he's lost a mate.
Basic tests we used to house the sick, and all that we had as doctors was one bottle of iodine. The bloke becomes pretty resourceful, trying to use what little we had to help the prisoners get over
Malaria!
Cholera!
Dysentery! Ulcers!
and rashes from their heat and humidity. A basic diet, just a small handful of rice, was not enough to help the men who sometimes spent 16 hours on the railway.
Japanese for sick men returned to work on the railway. Not only were we weak, taken as prisoners of war, but even weaker, we were ill.
What are you doing, mate? Just lying here in the mud. Come on, get up.
Leave me alone. I've had enough. My mate's dead and I just don't have the strength to go on.
Come on. Let's have a chat. I'll take you over to the medical centre. It's going to be alright.
Daily deprivation. Poverty. Monsoonal rain. Extreme heat. Humiliation.
12,000 allied POWs! Harry's building this railway!
Of the 600 men loaded into each wagon on the way to, there were 25 per wagon left by journey's end. Rice was eaten for breakfast, lunch and dinner, with occasional scraps of meat covered with flies and maggots. On this diet, the Japanese and Koreans told the prisoners and Asian labourers to work cheerfully from henceforth. Yet in the days of clearing jungle, levelling ground and cutting passes for 12 hours at a time, there was no cheer to be found. These working skeletons in no way resembled the strong and fit young Australians whom had left our shores. It would seem that the prisoners could not be any worse off until the Japanese introduced the method of freedom! This was when the Japanese made POWs work extra fast and long. It was the equivalent of working for 3 school days with no breaks and no going slow. Cold Silkins talked about Speedo as just about inhuman. Hellfire Pass would later be infamous for the use of this method. It was named so for the scenes of tortured bodies
resembled one's idea of hell. There were 700 deaths, and it was the most emotionally draining and deadly sector. Going slow was never an option. Undernourished and overworked, these men began dying at a faster rate than any other part of the railway. Of the 13,000 Australian workers of the Thai-Burma Railway, 2,646 died.
Liberation from captivity came at the end of the war. In September 1945, when the Japanese officially surrendered, the Australian POWs enjoyed their first taste of freedom. Bill Young, another POW from Changi, quotes, "We hadn't seen the sky or the stars for 2 years. We went down to the beach, a little beach at Changi, at the jail. We went down and we sat there all night. We just sat there, just the group of us. After September, Australian troops began to come home in ships and planes. Some did not come home until a few months or up to a year after due to injuries and illnesses. They were greeted by glittering parades and overrolled families and friends. To their families, they came back as heroes. The prisoners who did not come back until 1946 did not experience the parades or the crowds of cheering people. They came back to their families and friends." Dr. Peter Hendry was one of those men who came back in 1946. But there is a strange twist in this tale. Dr. Hendry's family believed that he was missing, believed killed in action. His family were waiting at the wharf, expecting Dr. Hendry's brother to walk off the ship.
Isn't it exciting? Your uncle's coming home from the war. You're going to see him soon. But what about Daddy? Peter? Your daddy's home! Daddy, Daddy!
Hello, my beautiful girl. My wife.
The returned POWs were no longer the same as what they were before the war. Their personalities saw drastic change, as they would often endure nightmares, flashbacks, or have a constant sense of fear running through their minds. Many POWs would spend their afternoons having beers with the mates that they had fought with, sharing their stories and tales of what they had accomplished to deal with the trauma they experienced after the war. Many POWs banded together to form the POW Association, realised that they were not only friends within the war, but they were friends for life.
We returned to a life that was just nothing. People would socialise and invite us to parties. I couldn't stand it. Everyone was yakking. As a prisoner of war, life was serious. We found it extremely difficult to come back. We went to the Australian hotel. I tipped the man who served us drinks. I think it was a sixpence. He just handed it back to me and he said,
Mate, you need this more than me.
it was such a shock. So much had changed.
Newcastle is very proud of its military heritage. It is my pleasure to introduce Dr. Peter Hendry, AO, who lives in Merriweather Heights and is a valued and distinguished member of our community. Dr. Peter Hendry.
Party outward.
You will be aware of the cadets in uniform standing on the stage, but you may not know why they are here. I call upon the Guard Commander, Cadet Corporal Andrew Kilgannon of the Service and Adventure Training Unit.
These 6 people and I are members of what the Armed Services call a catapult party. Traditionally, a catapult is a raised structure upon which a coffin is placed for display before burial. A catapult may also be used on ceremonial occasions, like today and Anzac Day, as a shrine of remembrance. 4 armed sentries guard it as a sign of respect. As you can see, they have their rifles upside down. This tradition originated with the introduction of tanks in the army during World War I. When a soldier fell during an attack, his mate would pick up his rifle and stick it by the bayonet in the ground upside down. to ensure that tanks would not run over his injured friend.
We now come to the time in the ceremony when the traditional elements of the Anzac service are performed. The first is the laying of the tributes. Flowers have been traditionally laid on graves and memorials in memory of the dead. Wreaths, as a symbol of honour, are also used. Sometimes, books are presented as a tribute instead of a wreath and are later given to libraries. Single red poppies, also known as the flower of remembrance, will be laid on the cenotaph, draped with an Australian flag, in memory of those who sacrificed their health, their strength, even their lives, that we might live in a free country. A bagpiper will play a special Scottish tune for mourning and remembrance called The Lament. The bagpiper is Thomas Barter, a student at Newcastle Grammar School.
I invite Councillor Stephanie Posniak, representing the Lord Mayor, to lay the first tribute on behalf of the citizens of Newcastle. To Doug Wallace, representing the Newcastle District Council of RSL sub-branches, on behalf of the Newcastle ex-service community. Mr. Terry Millett, on behalf of sponsors, the Newcastle Permanent Building Society. Dr. Peter Hendry, AO, in memory of the men and women of the Australian Armed Forces who served and paid the supreme sacrifice during World War II, the fall of Singapore and the subsequent deprivation, hardship and death as prisoners of war of the Japanese. Mr. Boyd Buffett, on behalf of the Department of Veterans Affairs. Leading Seaman Andrew Honeyman, representing the Royal Australian Navy. Leading Seaman Honeyman is 29 years old. Sapper Hamish McCrindle, representing the Australian Army, serves in the 8th Combat Engineer Regiment based at Adamstown. Sapper McCrindle is 19 years old. Aircraftswoman Samantha Smith, representing the Royal Australian Air Force, serves in 3 squadrons based at RAAF Williamtown. Samantha Smith is 18 years. Stephen Harris, on behalf of the Department of Education and Communities, Hunter Central Coast Region. With Mr. Ray Collins, on behalf of the Catholic Schools Office, Maitland Newcastle Diocese. And Mr. Duncan Mackenzie, on behalf of Newcastle's Independent Schools.
The next part of the ceremony is the reading of the Ode of Remembrance. This is a verse taken from a longer poem called For the Fallen by Lawrence Binyon. It was selected in 1919 to unveil a monument in London. Australians present thought it was so good they would use it at their remembrance ceremonies at home. Please listen to the words carefully. Chloe Adams, a Year 6 student and captain at Hamilton South Public School, will read the Ode of Remembrance.
They went with songs to the battle. They were young, straight of limb, true of eye, steady and aglow. They were staunch to the end against odds uncounted. They fell with their faces to the foe. They shall not grow old as we that are left grow old. Age shall not weary them, nor the years condemn. At the setting down of the sun, and in the morning, we will remember them.
The last post is played with a bugle and marked the end of the soldier's day. The last post has been incorporated into funeral and memorial services as a farewell. It symbolises that the duty of the dead is over. The bugler is Matthew Probert. Please bow your heads so that we can have 1 minute's silence. Look towards the flagpoles. In a moment, you will see the flags being raised to the mastheads. While this is being done, the bugler will play Reveille, which is a get-up call. It symbolises an awakening of a better world.
Please remain standing and join the Newcastle Combined Schools Anzac Service Choir to sing the Australian National Anthem.
Australians, oh, let us rejoice, oh, we are young and free, with gold and soil and wealth for toil, our home is earth by sea, Australia fair. In joyful strains and let us sing, at once Australia.
Please remain standing for the departure of the catapult party. I invite Mr. Terry Millett, Chief Executive Officer, Newcastle Permanent Building Society, to speak on behalf of the sponsors of today's service.
Councillors, distinguished guests, students, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for the invitation to today's event. It's an honour to be here today representing Newcastle Permanent at the 59th Annual Combined Schools Anzac Service. I'd like to acknowledge the directors of Newcastle Permanent who are here with us today, Mr Barry Lewis and Mr Phil Neate. I've been asked to convey the apologies of our chairman, Mr Michael Slater, who is disappointed he could not be with us today. I've attended a number of these services over the past few years, and I'm always very impressed with the performances put together by the students. There are always big footsteps to follow from the previous years, and once again your schools and your community have been done proud. And without getting carried away, I think it's fair to say, and I would like to say, that you've done your generation proud today as well. And of course we're very fortunate to have in our company today Dr Peter Hendry AO, whose story was so brilliantly conveyed on stage. Dr Hendry, on behalf of all of us, thank you for taking the time to tell your story to the students and allowing them to retell it to all of us. I'd also like to acknowledge all of those involved in organising today's event and thank the RSL, the Newcastle City Council, and finally I'd like to highlight the effort and hard work of James Mackay.
I invite Mr Doug Wallace, President, Newcastle District Council of RSL Subbranches, to speak on behalf of the ex-service community.
As President of Newcastle District Council of RSL Subbranches, I wish to congratulate all the students for their presentation of this excellent Anzac commemoration, which recognised the service and sacrifice of Australian prisoners of war during World War II in the Pacific.
Thank you, Mr Wallace. I invite Councillor Lisa Tierney, representing the Lord Mayor, to speak on behalf of the people of the City of Newcastle.
Good morning. What a shame the Lord Mayor was sick and missed that wonderful performance. I'll certainly be telling him about it. This is the first time I've had the privilege to be part of this service, and there is no better way of life in the world than that of an Australian. And you have certainly shown respect today for those men and women who have fought to give us this great country that we live in. The fact that this service is held in Newcastle every year since 1954 is a fantastic achievement and says much about the strength of the community in Newcastle and the Hunter. The City of Newcastle is very pleased to work with the local school education communities, the ex-servicemen community, the Department of Veteran Affairs and the Newcastle Permanent Building Society to present this important community commemoration of Australia's military heritage.
Distinguished guests and fellow students, this concludes the 2013 Newcastle Combined Schools Anzac service.